Welcome back everyone. In today's video I'm doing something a bit special to celebrate getting 100 subscribers on the channel. If you're a subscriber, thank you very much. It really means a lot that you guys are supporting this channel and enjoying my videos, so thank you. So what I'm doing today is I'm going to take you through 50 books that I've picked out of my bedroom. I've made sure to pick books that I haven't reviewed already on the channel, so if any of these you find interesting or you want me to talk a bit more about them, please let me know in the comments and I will probably or will do a review of them in the future. I've also chosen a nice mix. We've got some fantasy, we've got some non-fiction as well, some classics, and I even picked some books from my childhood. So I'll just reposition the camera so it doesn't look like I'm looming over you like some kind of creepy giant, and we can start getting through them. So let's start off with some of my childhood favourites. So first of all, I have this tiny little pocketbook of Rumpelstiltskin, which has some lovely... oh, that's not a picture page. Has some lovely pictures inside. Rumpel there. I used to read this a lot when I was very young at my grandmother's house, and I found it when I moved out and just kind of held on to it. Lovely. Second thing, probably my favourite series when I was a kid is this next one. This is the series of Unfortunate Events, which is in a lovely box set. It's the 3 books here. Great series, great kid series, and I think of all the kid series, this is probably my favourite. I think the writing style is quite intelligent and fun for kids. I think they've held up well over time, and I also like how dark it is. I think these are great books. The next book I have got here is Peter Pan. Need I say more? Peter Pan is just the embodiment of, you know, every child not wanting to grow up. I read this a lot when I was a kid, and I even remember reading this to my younger brother and sister who are twins when they were little. I used to read this to them to go to bed. So a lot of good memories for this one. Next up, we have a book that I don't think any of you will have heard of, but it's called The Last Polar Bear, and it is about a man that goes on a boat with a dog to the Antarctic, or the Arctic, or Antarctica, and I got this on my first ever plane flight, and I was terrified of flying on the plane, and this kind of calmed me down, so sentimentality meant that I've kept this book. The last thing that I have from when I was a kid is this huge book here of spooky stories, which my sister bought me as a birthday present. Again, lots of lovely pictures. I don't really remember any of the stories in this. I've got Vlad the Toothless Vampire. There was one about witches that I remember liking. Well, we don't need to find it, but it's a lovely book. It's got stories. Oh, there you got some witches there. It's got all kinds of ghouls, goblins, and even some poetry for children. So, nice little book. I'll probably keep this with me forever. And if I ever have kids, if I ever make that mistake, I've got something to read for them. Okay, so children's books over. Let's move on to what I'm reading at the moment. So, as I said in my How to Read More book, I do tend to read lots of books at once, and this is currently the pile that I am working through. So, first of all, we have the first 4 books of Earthsea. This book is completely ruined because I was reading it in the bath and dropped it. Luckily for me though, I do have this version of the book, which a friend gave me, which hopefully I won't drop in the bath because it's a lovely illustrated version with some wonderful pictures inside, and it's all 6 books. Next, a classic, or a collection of classics. I've got Lord Byron's major works. A friend of mine was reading Don Juan, and I was thinking about that when I was in a bookshop, so I picked this up, and I'll be probably reviewing one of these way down the line. This is probably at the back end of the things on my list because I'm reading quite a few tomes at the minute. Again, a very different style of book. This is an autobiography of a philosopher, Rousseau. Very interesting life. Not what I expected. He actually was a much more colourful character than I would have thought. If you're interested in philosophy, then especially political philosophy, might be interesting to give this a try. Certainly an interesting read. Next on the list we have the second book in the Mistborn series. I actually haven't started this one yet, but I am about to start it in the next coming days. So there'll be finally a review of the sequel to the first, which I didn't like all that much, but I enjoyed it enough to carry on with it, so hopefully this will make me like it even more. Next up we have Emma. This is actually my partner's copy, but I recently read Northanger Abbey, and if you watched my video you'll know that I loved that. So I want to read more, and my friends recommended Emma as like one of her best, so this is the next one that I'm going to be reading. Next up we have some poetry, this time by Emily Bronte. So I read Wuthering Heights a while ago. I've read it a few times now, and it's one of my favourite books. Although a lot of people who talk about the Brontes do say that her poetry is better than her work, her prose work, I don't know if I agree, not because the poems are bad, but because her work is just, that novel is just great. I love that book. But these poems are also fantastic. They're really short, they're really interesting. Lots of interesting things about nature, some positive, some negative. Really good book, I'm really enjoying them. Last thing that I'm reading at the moment is something that's taking up a lot of my time, and this is Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen, which, if you like fantasy and you want to read something really ancient, then this might be not such a bad thing. I'm currently on the third book, which is about a female knight called Britomart. And yeah, it's great, it's got loads of fun fantasy elements in it. Okay, so that's all the books that I'm reading at the moment. Let's tackle another pile. So, let's go with this pile. So this pile is somewhat non-fiction. It's mostly non-fiction, but there is some fiction here too. First of all, we have this, Sexual Personae by Camille Paglia. This is a book about art and decadence, going from ancient Egypt all the way to the 1800s with Emily Dickinson. It is a bit of a political, controversial book, but if you can look past those kind of themes in it, there's some great analysis of great texts and artworks throughout history. Really interesting book, and definitely worth a read, especially if you want to kind of get into art and you want to try and understand it. Good book. She writes very well. Next we have George Orwell's Animal Farm. This is actually stolen from my high school library, because I'm a thief. And this was what I did my A-level English literature project on. And I just still have the book, and I got an A star, so pretty good. Next we have, oh, this should have actually been in the kids reading pile, The Amber Spyglass, which I never actually read when I was a kid. I read the first two, I lost the first two, and I still just have this one. So I have no idea what happened to the other two. I have no idea how I've managed to keep on to the one I haven't read. But I would like to go read his Dark Materials again, partly because I never finished them, and partly because TV show's out, so it might be interesting to talk about these on the channel sometime soon. Next we have two autobiographies. So first of all we have Just Kids by Patti Smith. If you're interested in 70s rock and roll, then this is a great book. Another autobiography, also from a lady from the 60s, 70s, this time Nico, who is a very bizarre woman, and this is a biography, and it's interesting because she told a lot of lies about her life, and it's cool how he goes through them and tries to work out what's fact, what's fiction. Very interesting book. Also her music is very bizarre as well, so if you're interested in an interesting character or some interesting music, have a look up Nico. Great stuff. Now moving on to philosophy. So this is a great piece of medieval philosophy. It's by Boethius, and it's called The Consolation of Philosophy. Boethius was imprisoned at the time, and this is kind of more like prison literature than it is straight philosophy. But the kind of setup of it is he's in his prison cell, kind of thinking about how it is that terrible people always seem to get away and succeed, while good people like him are, abused, thrown in prison. And then philosophy, who's personified by a woman, comes to him and they have a conversation about life, about God, about all these things. It's a really cool, interesting work, and it's pretty accessible as well, even if you're, if you're not, haven't read any philosophy, like you could probably read this and still get a lot out of it, so fantastic book. Another philosophy book that I read recently for my current research project is a book called On Betrayal. This is again, you don't need, it's not too technical, and it uses a lot of examples from literature and the world religions, especially Judaism, because the guy that wrote it is Jewish, to illustrate its points about what betrayal is and how it, what it does to our relationships with people. Great book, really interesting, very accessible. The final book that I have is In the Buddha's Words, which is an anthology of discourses from the Pali Canon. I've always kind of been interested in world religions, and Buddhism was one of the main ones that I've been interested in for a while. And this book is great because it just has various important texts from the canon, and it's a really good introduction to the ideas, the key concepts, and it's actually split into chapters which give you a kind of précis of the texts, or the various texts that they've collected, built on themes. It's a really good introduction to the religious texts. It's a really good guide. Okay, that's some non-fiction. Let's look at some fantasy. So we've got Mort. This is the first death book in Terry Pratchett's Discworld collection. This was the first Discworld book that I actually enjoyed. I always liked Death, the character Death, and this storyline is just great. It's funny, it's well paced, all of the characters are well fleshed out. Basically all of the things that were going wrong in the early books are kind of rectified here. So we've got a classic fantasy book, dark fantasy. This is Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked, This Way Comes. This is just a beautiful book, and if you haven't read it, I really would recommend it. It's very accessible, it's beautifully written. The core friendship in the novel, if you really like those kind of fantasy books that are predicated on friendship, you'll really enjoy this. The friendship is just beautiful. It has some great themes about aging and growing up and being an older man or woman. It's a really good book. Definitely will be reviewing this at some point on my channel. Game of Thrones, I won't need to say much about this, you all know it. It's a pretty famous series with a pretty infamous TV show now. Read these about 3 years ago, which is why I haven't actually done them on my channel. But I actually never read A Dance with Dragons. So what I might do at some point is reread them, buy Dance of Dragons. Maybe if The Winds of Winter comes out, I'll do it around that time. And then get these up on the channel too. Ooh, so this one, Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. I haven't read this yet, but my partner bought it because he wanted a fantasy series that was finished, and he is really enjoying this. So I'll probably start this sometime in the near future. What have we got over here? Ooh, so this is a Russian series, the Night Watch series. I read this when I was like, I read this a long time ago, when I was like 13 or something. I don't remember all that much about it. I remember the magic system being really interesting. I remember a nice blend of werewolves, vampires, witches. It had a very cool magic system. I don't remember too much about it anymore. But maybe maybe I will read this again at some time and review it, because I think it was a very good series with lots of interesting concepts. Yeah, good. Next up we have Weaveworld by Clive Barker. So Clive Barker is someone I've talked about a bit on my channel already, because I think his work is great. This is one of his first, or possibly his first, straight fantasy books. It's kind of a bridge between fantasy and horror, but leaning more on the fantasy side. And it's about a magical world that exists in a carpet, hence Weaveworld. Very bizarre concept, but done really well. Clive Barker just has a great imagination, and he's very good at articulating his worlds. This is a great book, and I will definitely, would definitely recommend you to read it if you've not read any Clive Barker. Good place to start. Oh look, it's Wuthering Heights! So this is a copy of the book from my grandparents' house that I pinched. It's very nice. Looks nice and classical. Need I say more? It's a wonderful book. Don't expect a soppy romance novel. I think a lot of the adaptions of the book have ruined this book by making it out to be something that it isn't. It's a story about nature and civilization and cruel, horrible people. It's not a love novel. Don't go in expecting that, because you won't enjoy it. So, great book, but I think a very misunderstood book. Ooh, non-fiction book. So this is called The Monster. The Monsters Know What They Are Doing. And this is a D&D book, and my partner bought this, and it is how to, if you're a DM, how to make your villains or monsters more than just kind of generic, boring characters. Oh, another non-fiction book. So this is a collection of lyrics by Stephen Sondheim, who is a musical theatre genius. Fantastic book. He has all of the lyrics to his works, and he also comments on them, comments on the shows, lots of nice information, little stories about how some of the songs came to be, how they changed. You have various drafts of them. I love this. I also have its sequel, which has his later shows in it. Great book, really enjoyed it, and if you like musicals and you like Sondheim, you should definitely buy this. Okay, back to kind of odds and ends at this point. Let's just systematize slightly. Ugh. I think 50 bucks was quite ambitious. Okay. Let's try and power through. Richard Dawkins, God Delusion. Yes, I was an edgy teenager as well. That's all we need to say about that. Stephen King, Misery. Great film. Also great book. I think I might actually prefer the film to the book, but still worth checking out. Edmund Burke, a philosophical inquiry into the sublime and beautiful. This is the first book on aesthetics that I ever read. It's a bit dated, but it is actually quite interesting, and if you kind of adapt, you can sort of adapt his theory to a modern sensibility, and it's quite good. He also writes, for someone who's writing so long ago, he writes quite well. Just throwing these on the floor, I don't care. This is a collection of Oscar Wilde's works. It's got Dorian Gray in. It's also got a collection of his fairy tales, which, if you haven't read them, you should, because his fairy tales are really good, and they're very sad, but they're some of the sweetest fairy tales as well. I mean, yeah, his fairy tales, give them a go. Next, a friend of mine got me this for Christmas. It's Donna Tartt's The Secret History. Fantastic book. I really enjoyed it, and I'll be reading it again and then doing a review, because there's a lot to take in with this book, and I kind of want to think about it a bit more before I review it. So this will be coming in the future once I do a reread. Ooh, another one from school, The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. This is a very sad book, a very dark book, but it's written, well, parts of it are written from the perspective of children, and she does lots of interesting things with language so that it seems like you're reading a book from a child. And look, it's got all of my notes from when I was a teenager, and it's also falling apart because I have read it so much. And maybe because I keep throwing my books everywhere. Next we have June. I didn't like this, but I am going to reread it at some point. Probably. Next is Kurt Vonnegut, Welcome to the Monkey House. This is a collection of his short stories. I recently read Slaughterhouse 5 by him. I thought his short fiction was better. I think his humour works much better in short novel format, and this was probably one of the best things that I read in the year that I read it. Another philosophy book. This is The Meditations by Descartes. If any of you who've studied philosophy at university, you probably have read this, because they love to give it to undergrads. And the reason why I picked it is because I recently taught undergrads and we did this, so I had to reread it. Great book, great introduction to analytic philosophy, well written, engaging, lovely. Next up we have Red Dragon by Thomas Harris. This is the first book in his Hannibal Lecter series. I've only read the first two, so this and The Silence of the Lambs. I do have the other two, I just never got around to reading them, which is odd because I did enjoy them. So I'll probably read them again at some time in the future. This is a good gothic novel. If you have read The Monk by Matthew Gregory Lewis, then this would be interesting to read. Charlotte Dakka Savoya, because it's basically copying that book, but it's told from a female perspective, as in it's the female that's the villain rather than a man. It's very good, it's very well written. Yes, it's derivative, but it does interesting things with the source material, so it's worth, it's a good gothic novel in its own right. Another one of these that I pinched from my Bennetts House, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Great story. There are also some creepy pictures inside. There he is, having beaten someone on the street. Great novel. I want to lay this on the floor because it's nice. Shouldn't throw things on the floor. Next up we have The Sea Wolf. This is by Jack London. I picked this up off the shelf in my grandparents' house a long time ago and read it. It's about a man that goes on a ship, and the ship gets taken over by this tyrant guy, and it's about the abuses that him and this woman also on the ship, travelling with him, that they face. I haven't read this in a long time, but I did really enjoy it. There's a great scene where they throw someone off the ship, and he's there holding... No, they tie him to the ship, make him hold on a rope, and he's there for several days, and then eventually he goes. It's quite dark, but it's a good book. I really did enjoy it. Okay, moving on. Now we've got Morris by E.M. Forster. Probably his most underrated book, partly I think because it's about two gay men, where his other ones are like big social novels, or novels about colonialism. I really like this book. It's nice to have a classic book where homosexuality is there, and also portrayed in a positive way, rather than in a tragic or decadent way, like, say, in Dorian Gray. Great book. If you're interested in LGBT fiction, especially in classical literature, you should definitely read this one. Ooh. Next we have Ulysses, which Jesus Christ, I just finished this a couple of days ago for a book club. It's a very difficult book, as its reputation you will know. It's very difficult to read, but it's also really well crafted. There's a whole there are chapters, for instance, like this one, where the entire chapter is a script. The last chapter is done without any punctuation at all, except for one full stop. There's a chapter where he has medieval English, then like Victorian English, and kind of the evolution of language. It's really impressive in terms of craft, even if it's a very hard book to read. But if you really want a challenge, then you should definitely give this a try. We're almost there. We've just got these left. Name of the Wind. Another one that my partner read. He really liked it, so I read it. I was okayed by it. I wasn't wowed by it, but... Next up we have an Angela Carter book. So I have talked about Angela Carter a bit on my channel already. I think she's great. I actually have all of her books. But this is the one that I read most recently again. It's called The Passion of New Eve, which is about it's a dystopian book in which a man gets captured by a group of very angry women who force him to have a sex change, and then it kind of follows him and, well, now her, on her journey. And it's a very good book. It's very interesting. It explores some really interesting themes about gender and sex and all that kind of stuff. Great book. Really enjoyed it. Next we have From the Corner of His Eye by Dean Koontz. My auntie gave me this a long time ago, and I think I must have been 14, so again, it's a bit like The Night Watch. I don't remember it all that much. I do remember really liking it. That's about it. Next we have the Necronomicon by H.P. Lovecraft. This is a big collection of all of his works. This is a book that I've kind of dipped in and out of because it's a collection and it's also massive. But his imagination is just so darkly twisted. I love his monsters. The tales are just great. In fact, I would say that he sort of reminds me a bit of Clive Barker in terms of that dark, perverted imagination. Some great stories in here. If you like your monster stories, you should definitely read some Lovecraft because it's great stuff. And the last book that I have is a book that I actually wrote myself when I was a teenager. I finished it when I was 19, published it by myself, and I wouldn't recommend that you buy it, but I thought it would be interesting to talk about it. It is set in the Victorian times, in a fictional town that's surrounded all by forest. The main character, or one of the main characters, William, lives in an orphanage, and they're kind of shunned by the town, but they don't really know why they're shunned by the town. And one day a girl arrives who has no memory of where she came from, and after she arrives, some very bizarre things begin to happen in the town. First of all, there is a murder, and she is then accused from it because she's an outsider. And the children then begin to investigate what's going on to try and absolve her. And as they do, they get sucked into a fantasy, essentially, story. Yeah, I wrote this when I was a teenager. It's interesting to go back and read it because I kind of see myself when I was 16. But it's alright. I was pretty happy with it at the time. Okay, so that is everything. My room is now... there are just books all over the floor. So, once again, thank you to everyone that subscribed to my channel. Hopefully, there were a lot of books there, but hopefully some of them took your fancy. If you want me to review any of them on the channel, please let me know, because it's always nice to go back and reread old things. So, yeah, hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye.